This is Land of Havilah, 1 Chronicles 22. Coming up, David's still standing at the threshing floor of Ornan, where he's just made some sacrifices. It's on Mount Moriah, about a half-mile from Mount Zion. As he stood there, he had a revelation. Maybe it was inspired by the fact that Yahweh just answered him by sending fire from the sky onto the altar. Verse 1. Then David said, "This is the house of Yahweh God, and this is the altar of burnt offering for Israel." Comment, he says, "This is the house of Yahweh God," end quote. Previously, Yahweh told David that his son would build him a house, 1 Kings 8:19. Now David realizes this will be the location of it. Coming up, David knows he won't build the temple, but he's so zealous for it, he's going to prepare materials and recruit some of the laborers to give his son a head start on the job. Verse 2. David gave orders to gather together the foreigners who were in the land of Israel, and he set masons to cut dressed stones to build God's house. David prepared iron in abundance for the nails for the doors of the gates and for the couplings, and brass in abundance without weight, and cedar trees without number, for the Sidonians and the people of Tyre brought cedar trees in abundance to David. David said, "Solomon my son is young and tender, and the house that is to be built for Yahweh must be exceedingly magnificent, of fame and of glory throughout all countries. I'll therefore make preparation for it." So David prepared abundantly before his death. Comment, Solomon would be the heir to the throne. He wasn't David's oldest, but he was Yahweh's choice, as we'll see coming up. In the census, there were 153,600 foreigners in Israel, 2 Chronicles 2:17. In verse 2, David ordered the foreigners to quarry stones. These would be massive stones, 1 Kings 7:10, such that it would probably take hundreds or thousands of men to cut and transport them. Solomon will be cutting additional ones, 1 Kings 5:17. In verse 4, David collected cedar timber from Tyre and Sidon. Solomon will be acquiring more, 1 Kings 5:6. In verse 5, David thought Solomon was young and inexperienced, and the temple must be exceedingly magnificent, so he wanted to give Solomon a head start. Coming up, he'll prepare Solomon and tell him why he won't do the job himself. Verse 6. Then he called for Solomon his son and commanded him to build a house for Yahweh, the God of Israel. David said to Solomon his son, "As for me, it was in my heart to build a house to the name of Yahweh my God, but Yahweh's word came to me, saying, 'You've shed blood abundantly and have made great wars. You shall not build a house to my name, because you shed much blood on the earth in my sight. Behold, a son shall be born to you, who shall be a man of peace. I'll give him rest from all his enemies all around, for his name shall be Solomon, and I'll give peace and quietness to Israel in his days. He shall build a house for my name, and he will be my son, and I will be his father, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom over Israel forever." Comment, in verse 6, David commanded Solomon that when he would become king, he should build Yahweh's house. We call it Solomon's temple, but it was literally Yahweh's house because Yahweh inhabited the place. 1 Kings 8:13. David knew that the house couldn't fully contain Yahweh by any means. That's why he called the temple also the footstool of our God, 1 Chronicles 28:2, which gives more the picture of it not containing Yahweh so much. In verse 9, David knew Solomon's name even before Solomon was born, because Yahweh told it to him, quote, "His name shall be Solomon," end quote. At the same time, in this prophecy before Solomon was born, Yahweh said he would give peace and quietness during Solomon's reign in verse 9, which will be remarkable after the seeming constant war during David's reign. In verse 10, Yahweh said Solomon would be the heir to the throne, that he would build the temple, and the throne would last forever. Forever is the word used in most translations, but the Hebrew wording's a little more flexible. Forever is ad olam, which doesn't strictly mean forever. It's also translated unto the age. So there is a little wiggle room there, but it doesn't necessarily have to be forever. David knew that there was an if attached to the whole thing because Yahweh told him, quote, "If your sons are careful of their way to walk before me in truth with all their heart and with all their soul, you shall not lack a man on the throne of Israel." 1 Kings 2:4. So there was an if there. And Yahweh also said of Solomon, quote, "I will establish his kingdom forever if he resolutely performs my commandments." 1 Chronicles 28:7. So the forever throne will be conditional. David's descendants must be obedient, or Yahweh will put an end to their dynasty. Coming up, David knows Yahweh's already spoken all this, but Solomon must take hold of it and establish it. He tells Solomon, verse 11, "Now, my son, may Yahweh be with you and prosper you, and build the house of Yahweh your God, as he has spoken concerning you. May Yahweh give you discretion and understanding, and put you in charge of Israel, so that you may keep the law of Yahweh your God. Then you will prosper, if you observe to do the statutes and the ordinances which Yahweh gave Moses concerning Israel." Comment: Solomon's responsibilities are all laid out in the law of Moses. Yahweh promised Israel, "Keep the law and you'll prosper," Leviticus 26. Still in verse 14, "Be strong and courageous, don't be afraid and don't be dismayed." Comment: David knows times will come that require strength and courage, times that would dismay a man if he didn't have faith. So he says, "Keep the faith, be strong and courageous, don't be dismayed." Verse 14, "Now behold, in my affliction I have prepared for Yahweh's house 100,000 talents of gold, 1,000,000 talents of silver, and brass and iron without weight, for it is in abundance. I've also prepared timber and stone, and you may add to them." Comment: At today's prices, that's about $202 billion in gold and $27 billion in silver, which is about equal to the wealth of the richest men of the world today. But no man today has that much in gold and silver, unless he's hiding it somewhere. David has all this set aside for the temple. When he said the temple would be exceedingly magnificent in verse 5, he wasn't kidding. Verse 15, "There are also workmen with you in abundance, cutters and workers of stone and timber, and all kinds of men who are skillful in every kind of work. Of the gold, the silver, the brass, and the iron there is no number. Arise and be doing, and may Yahweh be with you." Comment: There's a memorable line, "Arise and be doing, and may Yahweh be with you." Coming up, David will get the leading men of the nation on board. Verse 17, "David also commanded all the princes of Israel to help Solomon his son, saying, 'Isn't Yahweh your God with you? Hasn't he given you rest on every side? For he's delivered the inhabitants of the land into my hand, and the land is subdued before Yahweh and before his people.'" Comment: After many wars, the peace is established. Verse 19, "Now set your heart and your soul to follow Yahweh your God. Arise, therefore, and build the sanctuary of Yahweh God, to bring the ark of Yahweh's covenant and the holy vessels of God into the house that is to be built for Yahweh's name." Comment: The holy vessels are all the furnishings and articles that are currently in the tabernacle at Gibeon and in the courtyard of it, but to be more specific, the plan is to build new ones. Yahweh's spoken the word of what will be done, and it's up to Solomon to establish it. He should be able because, as David asked in verse 18, quote, "Isn't Yahweh your God with you?" 1 Chronicles 23 is next.